Right. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the world of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
And
always a good time.
always a good time.
Yes. Yes.
So we'll be drawing from Francis King's book, The Magical World of Aleister Crowley, to try and figure out just how this guy, who was raised in such a sort of like straight-laced, rigid, religious background, ended up, you know, becoming one of the most influential figures in modern occultism.
Well, and that's the fascinating thing, is that you can see how his early life really kind of shaped, you know, where he ended up later in terms of like this rejection of, you know, kind of traditional religious ideas and embracing this very like radical self-expression, personal empowerment kind of thing.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
King paints a pretty vivid picture of Crowley's childhood. What was it like growing up in that environment?
Well, he was raised by parents who were members of the Plymouth Brethren.
Okay.
And they believed in the absolute literal truth of the Bible.
Right.
And I guess the easiest way to say it is they were real hardcore fundamentalists.
Okay.
And that's something I think a lot of people today don't really understand.
Right.
But they also followed this doctrine of predestination. So, like, imagine as a kid growing up, you know, being told that basically your fate is decided before you're even born. You know, heaven or hell, that's it. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
That's some heavy stuff.
Pretty intense for a kid to process.
Yeah, you don't get it.
No wonder he rebelled against organized religion later.
Exactly. I mean, how could you not? Right, you know?
Yeah.
But it wasn't just the Plymouth Brethren, though. I mean, his family had these kind of unusual connections to other groups that kind of blended politics and religion.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In a way that was pretty unique even for that time.
Like what?
Well, for instance, they were English legitimists. Which basically meant they supported the restoration of the Stuart dynasty to the British throne.
Okay.
And they were also involved with the Order of Corporate Reunion, which was this group that believed in the reordination of certain Anglican clergymen by a bishop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've got this like mix of like super hardcore religion and then also like pretty intense political stances.
Right.
Swirling around this kid.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a recipe for some interesting outcomes.
Yeah.
You know?
I can imagine.
So against that backdrop, you can see how he kind of goes in the opposite direction. You know, he goes from this dogmatic environment to embracing this philosophy of individual self-discovery.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like a total 180.
Yeah, it's like he swung to the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
But he wasn't alone
No.
in being interested in the occult.
Right.
This was like a time when there was like a growing fascination with magic and esoteric knowledge, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. The late 19th century saw a real surge in interest in the occult. Yeah. You think about like figures like Oscar Wilde, Arthur Machen, you know, Beardsley, all these guys were exploring these themes. And it was kind of like a reaction, I think, to the prevailing, you know, kind of materialistic worldview. People were looking for a deeper meaning beyond the purely rational.
Yeah. So he wasn't just some like isolated eccentric. He was tapping into a larger cultural current.
Exactly.
Okay. And this fascination leads him to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
A secret society dedicated to the study and practice of ritual magic.
Right.
So this is where the magic really starts to enter the picture.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about the Golden Dawn?
Well, like, the Golden Dawn was all about bringing about change in accordance with will, using rituals and specific techniques to achieve that goal.
Okay, so it was like a very deliberate, structured approach to magic.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, and they were organized in like an outer order and an inner order?
Right, yeah. So the outer order was where members kind of focused on like the occult theory.
Okay.
And then the inner order was where they really got into like the practical magic, the application.
It sounds like an occult university.
Yeah, very much so.
And it attracted some pretty interesting characters, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even Constance Wilde.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Oscar Wilde's wife was a member.
That's right. Yeah. So we've got this group of intellectuals, artists, drawn to this esoteric knowledge. And at the helm of this is S.L. McGregor Mathers.
Yes. A charismatic figure.
Okay.
Who claimed to be in contact with what he called secret chiefs. Supernatural beings.
Hold on. Secret chiefs.
Yeah.
Guiding their teachings.
Right.
Now we're talking. Yeah. How did they supposedly communicate with these beings?
Well, he used some unusual techniques.
Okay.
Like table turning. And pendulum slinging to try and receive messages from these entities.
Okay, so this was all part of that
right?
Bigger spiritualist movement.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And among this group of occult enthusiasts, we also find W.B. Yeats, the poet, the renowned poet.
Yes.
So he was also interested
deeply interested. Yes.
And especially in
particularly what was known as diabolism.
And diabolism, remind me.
Well, diabolism refers to the practice of invoking demons or other malevolent entities for magical purposes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a controversial area of study even within the occult world.
Okay, so we've got Crowley.
Yeah.
In this secret society, surrounded by all these people, exploring some
pretty intense stuff,
pretty intense areas of occultism. What happens next?
Well, Crowley's rise within the Golden Dawn was pretty rapid.
Okay.
He partnered with another member named Alan Bennett, who actually shared some forbidden magical knowledge. Oh, forbidden knowledge? Like what?
Well, you know, things like techniques for creating talismans and conducting certain rituals.
Okay. So, did this get him into trouble?
Well, there was one incident where they created a talisman intended for healing.
Okay.
And it ended up having some unintended side effects.
Oh,
yeah.
On the recipient.
On the recipient.
Okay.
And this really highlights a key point about magic, as Crowley saw it.
Okay.
It's a powerful force, but it can be dangerous if it's not handled properly.
It's not a game.
It's not a game.
It's not a game, no.
Okay, so what other kinds of magical experiments was Crowley drawn to?
He was particularly fascinated by the evocation of demons. For instance, King mentions his attempt to summon the demon Boethier.
Evocation of a demon.
Yes.
Okay, tell me there were robes.
Oh, absolutely. Chanting, dimly lit room. All of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, these rituals were very elaborate, full of symbolism, specific steps, designed to contact and ideally control these entities.
So, like, what kind of things would be involved?
Well, you know, intricate diagrams on the floor, specific incantations, tools, wands, daggers, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. But why go through all that trouble to contact a demon?
In traditional occultism, demons were often viewed as sources of knowledge and power.
Okay. So not necessarily like evil.
Not necessarily evil, no.
No.
And Beware in particular was believed to be a teacher of philosophy, logic, and even the medicinal properties of plants.
So it's more about like tapping into their unique and gaining knowledge that you might not be able to get through through normal means.
Ordinary means.
Right. Yeah. And that idea of harnessing power is really central to Crowley's work.
Okay.
He was a practical magician.
Okay.
He wasn't content with just theory.
Right.
He wanted to put these ideas into practice and see what they could achieve.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this desire to experience magic firsthand leads us to a pretty pivotal moment in Crowley's life.
Yes.
The reception of the Book of the Law.
Right.
What exactly happened there?
Well, in 1904, while he was in Cairo with his wife, Rose, Crowley claimed to receive the Book of the Law through a spiritual entity named Aiwass.
Okay, so this book basically signaled...
Well, he believed it signaled the dawn of a new eon, the eon of Horus, and that he was chosen to be its prophet.
Okay, new eon, a prophet.
Yeah, it's big stuff. Pretty big. What exactly was the message of this book?
Well, at its core, The Book of the Law was a call for radical self-fulfillment and the rejection of societal restrictions. Its most famous line, of course, is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." But Crowley always emphasized that this wasn't simply a license to do whatever you please. It was about discovering your true will, your deepest purpose, and living in alignment with it.
Okay, so it's more about self-discovery and authentic living. But with a magical twist.
Oh,
okay. It's fascinating how this book became such a cornerstone for his whole philosophy of magical system from that point on. But with these kinds of works, there's always the question of authorship. I mean, was it really a message from a separate entity? Or something Crowley created himself? Maybe unconsciously.
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And there's no easy answer. King explores different possibilities in the book. But ultimately, it comes down to what you believe. Was it conscious creation? An unconscious emanation? Or genuine spiritual communication? It's a mystery that continues to intrigue people even today.
It does. It adds another layer of complexity to this already fascinating story.
Yes, very much so.
And this book wasn't the only thing shaping Crowley's magical path. He also became deeply involved with a group called the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, which focused on sex magic.
Yes, that's right. Crowley's exploration of sex magic was inspired by tantric practices and his involvement with the OTO.
Okay, so this order believed that sexual energy could be harnessed and directed in magical workings to achieve altered states of consciousness and spiritual transformation. So it's not just about the physical act itself. It's about tapping into a specific kind of energy for a larger purpose.
For a larger purpose, exactly.
What were some of the core ideas behind his approach to sex magic?
Crowley's system, which he often called Western Tantra, emphasized the deliberate and controlled use of sexual energy for spiritual and magical goals.
So it's not
about just indulging in pleasure for its own sake. It was about mastering this primal force within the body and using it to connect with higher realms. Achieve greater self-awareness and even influence the material world.
So it's like a very complex...
It is very complex.
An esoteric system.
And it's important to remember the social context of the time.
You
know, the early 20th century had very rigid social norms around sexuality. So Crowley's open exploration and teaching of sex magic was incredibly scandalous and shocking to many.
Which probably played right into his hands, knowing how much he liked to be controversial.
He was never one to shy away from pushing boundaries and challenging conventional morality.
And this desire to live in accordance with the principles of the Book of the Law led him to establish the Abbey of Colima in Cefalù, Sicily. Tell me more.
Well, the Abbey was intended to be kind of like a living experiment, a community dedicated to exploring true will and engaging in magical practices without the constraints of conventional society. So it was a real mix of bohemian freedom and strict ritual practices. Crowley lived there with Leah Herzig, his Scarlet Woman, and a whole rotating cast of disciples and visitors. They engaged in all sorts of magical workings, rituals, and of course, sex magic.
Sounds like a wild mix of...
it was a pretty intense scene.
Personalities and practices, what kind of people were drawn to this community?
Crowley attracted all sorts of people who were seeking something more, something beyond the confines of ordinary life. King mentions one resident in particular, Jane Wolfe, a Hollywood actress. Wow.
Who was drawn to the Abbey seeking healing.
Interesting. So it wasn't just like a haven for occultists. There were people from all walks of life.
From all walks of life?
Looking for something. But the Abbey also became a hotbed of controversy, didn't it?
Unfortunately, it did. Rumors of drug use, sexual rituals, even animal sacrifice started circulating.
Okay.
And Crowley's lifestyle and practices, they clashed with the conservative morality of the time.
Okay.
And he quickly became a tabloid sensation.
Yeah.
The British press dubbed him the wickedest man in the world.
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's quite a label to carry.
It is.
So this experiment in communal living was headed for trouble.
It was.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah.
The tragic death of Raoul Loveday,
a
young disciple at the Abbey, sparked a huge scandal.
Okay.
The details surrounding his death are still murky, but the media frenzy that followed forced Crowley to flee Sicily. His reputation forever tarnished.
So the Abbey experiment came to a rather abrupt and tragic end. What happened to Crowley after that?
Well, despite the scandal, Crowley continued his magical work. Even in the face of increasing notoriety, he traveled extensively, connected with various occult groups, and focused on reviving the OTO. He also continued to write prolifically, elaborating on his magical system, sex magic, and his ever-evolving philosophy.
Wow. So even after all that, he was incredibly resilient.
He was.
And he still had followers who were dedicated to his teachings.
Yes. Amazing.
Yeah.
King mentions Karl Germer.
Yes.
A dedicated disciple who remained loyal.
Loyal throughout his life.
Throughout his life.
Yeah.
And he played a key role in preserving Crowley's teachings and ensuring their continuation after Crowley's death.
Exactly.
So even with all the controversy, Crowley managed to build a lasting legacy. And it's a legacy that's
incredibly complex.
And multifaceted. He's considered one of the most influential figures in modern occultism. But he remains
deeply controversial.
Both revered and reviled.
Exactly.
His life and teachings continue to fascinate and provoke people.
I do.
And his impact on Western esotericism is undeniable.
It really is.
It's a story that faces more questions than answers.
I think so.
What drew so many people to Crowley, despite his flaws and scandals, can we separate his magical system from all the controversy that surrounded him? And what, if anything, can we learn from his life and work?
Those are all really good questions. And they're questions that I think we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into his magical system, his writings, and the lasting impact he's had on modern occultism.
All right. Sounds good.
Get ready for more surprises and thought-provoking insights as we continue our deep dive into the world of Aleister Crowley.
Okay, we're back. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the complexities of Aleister Crowley's life. From strict religion to demon evocation to... It's a wild ride.
It's a wild ride.
For sure.
It is.
But we've only scratched the surface of his magical system. What other aspects of his...
Well, before Crowley delved deeply into sex magic, his main focus was on a more traditional form of ritual magic. He spent years studying and practicing the techniques he learned in the Golden Dawn, seeking to, expand his understanding and abilities.
And one of his most intriguing explorations, as King describes it, involves something called the 30 airs. Freethers. Can you explain what those are?
Think of the airs as like different dimensions of consciousness, realms of existence beyond our normal perception. Crowley believed they held the keys to profound spiritual insights and untapped magical power.
It sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel. But how did he actually access these airs? What was...
It involved a combination of specific ritual, visualizations, and a system of magic known as the Enochian system.
The Enochian system. That rings a bell. Remind me what that's all about.
So the Enochian system is a system of magic that's based on the work of two Elizabethan occultists, John Dee and Edward Kelly. They claim to have received this system directly from angels through a series of visions and communications.
Okay, so pretty out there.
Pretty out there.
Even for the world of occultism.
Even for the world of occultism. Yeah. So Crowley's tapping into this older, angelically inspired system.
Yeah, to explore these
otherworldly realms.
Otherworldly realms. Yeah. What did he...
Well, his journey through the airs, as King describes it, was anything.
Okay.
But straightforward.
Okay.
He encountered strange entities.
Okay.
Received cryptic messages.
Okay.
And even experienced a kind of symbolic death and rebirth.
Wow, that's like a real mind-bending experience.
It was a profound psychological and spiritual journey.
Okay. Did these explorations change him?
They did. Crowley emerged from this experience with kind of a reinforced sense of his own destiny, his conviction that he was meant for greatness and destined to lead humanity into a new era.
Okay.
It really solidified his belief that he was the prophet of the Aeon of Horus, as proclaimed in the Book of the Law.
So it all ties together, the heirs, the book, his sense of purpose, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place.
It does.
But after delving into these more traditional magical practices, Crowley eventually shifts his focus to sex magic and the teachings of the OTO. What are some of the key ideas behind his...
So Crowley's system of sex magic, Roshi often referred to as Western Tantra, was all about harnessing sexual energy for spiritual and magical goals. He believed that by mastering this energy, you could achieve heightened states of consciousness, connect with higher spiritual realms, and even influence the material world.
Okay. It sounds like a very deliberate and controlled approach. Yeah, it's about, taking something that's usually considered taboo and using it for spiritual growth.
And he wasn't shy about sharing these...
No, he wasn't. No, he wrote extensively about sex magic, outlining rituals, symbolism, even specific techniques.
Okay.
Yeah.
And his teachings on sex magic still resonate today.
Yeah, I mean,
he's considered one of the most influential...
Yeah, he's considered a pioneer by some. A dangerous charlatan by others. But there's no denying the impact he's had on the way people approach and understand this aspect of magic.
Yeah, it's fascinating how his ideas, which were so shocking in his time, have become...
more mainstream within certain circles.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's important to remember that his own practice of sex magic was deeply intertwined with his personal life and the events at the Abbey of Thelema.
The Abbey was Crowley's attempt to create kind of a living embodiment of his philosophy. A community where people could explore their true wills and engage in magical practices without the constraints of conventional society. And sex magic was definitely a part of that.
But as we know, things didn't exactly as planned at the Abbey.
No, it was plagued by scandal, financial instability, and ultimately tragedy. Crowley's personality, his often abusive treatment of his followers, and the clash between his ideals and the realities of human nature all contributed to its downfall. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned experiments can have unforeseen consequences.
It is a fascinating and cautionary tale.
Absolutely.
But even after the Abbey debacle, Crowley never gave up on his magical pursuits.
No, he kept going.
What did he do next?
He continued writing, refining his system, attracting new followers. He also spent a lot of time traveling, engaging with different cultures, exploring their esoteric
He was always seeking knowledge, always pushing
the boundaries
of what he knew. And during his travels, there was one period that King highlights as particularly intriguing. Crowley's magical retirement on Esopus Island.
Right.
What was that all about?
Well, this period reveals a different side of Crowley.
Okay.
He deliberately isolated himself from the world, focusing on meditation, yoga, and solitary magical practices.
A period of real quiet contemplation amidst all the chaos and controversy.
Exactly.
Did this retreat change him?
According to King, Crowley emerged from this retreat feeling renewed and more connected to his magical purpose than ever before.
Right. So the solitude and introspection kind of allowed him to reconnect with his core beliefs and motivations.
Yeah.
But he didn't stay hidden away.
No, she didn't.
For long.
She did not.
Crowley always seemed to find his way back into the spotlight.
He did.
And his later years were marked by a mix of magical experimentation, legal troubles, and an ongoing battle to maintain his reputation and influence.
Right.
He was a complex,
a
contradictory figure, someone who could inspire great devotion and also generate intense criticism.
Yes.
It sounds like he was constantly pushing the envelope.
He was
testing the limits of both himself and society. And through it all, he continued to write, producing a vast body
of work
that explored every facet of magic philosophy and his own personal experiences. His writings are...
They're a treasure trove.
A treasure trove of
esoteric knowledge.
Poetic insights. And let's be honest, often shocking and provocative ideas. They're not for everyone, but for those interested in the deeper, often darker aspects of Western esotericism.
Okay.
Well,
they're an essential read.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From his early days exploring traditional magic to his controversial system of sex magic, the tumultuous years it is, Abbey of Thelema, and his ongoing quest for knowledge. But there's still more to unpack.
There is. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of the key themes that run through Crowley's work, his lasting legacy, and the ongoing debate about his place in the history of occultism.
Okay, I can't wait to dig into those deeper layers.
It should be good.
Stay tuned as we wrap up our exploration of the magical world. Aleister Crowley.
That sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Aleister Crowley. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From his childhood to his magical experiments, his writings, even his infamous Abbey of Thelema. It's been quite a journey. But despite all the intricate details and controversies, there are some core themes woven throughout Crowley's work that help us understand his enduring influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack those themes. What stands out to you as the most essential takeaways?
Well, one of the most prominent and perhaps misunderstood concepts is this idea of true will.
Okay.
Crowley believed that each person has a unique purpose. A path they're meant to follow. And discovering and aligning with that true will was central to his teachings.
So it's about finding your true calling, your reason for being, but on a much deeper, spiritual level.
Absolutely. And Crowley believed that magic wasn't just about spells and rituals, but a tool for self-transformation, a way to break free from societal conditioning and unlock your full potential. He saw it as a technology for aligning with your true will.
So it's about empowerment. Taking control of your destiny, but with a magical twist.
Exactly.
And that emphasis on personal empowerment really resonates even today.
It does, absolutely.
I mean, people are still drawn to this idea.
To the idea of living a life.
Of living a life true to themselves.
Know themselves.
Not dictated by external pressures.
Not dictated by external pressure.
But Crowley's ideas about true will also seem intertwined with his less admirable qualities.
There's a tension there. I
mean, King doesn't shy away from it. Crowley's ego and often abusive behavior towards his followers.
Certainly contradict these ideals of self-discovery and ethical living that he espoused.
Yeah, it's a classic case of someone who could articulate a really powerful philosophy, but struggled to live up to it. Consistently. Makes him all the more fascinating, though.
Right, but it also raises questions about his legacy.
Absolutely.
Speaking of his legacy, how has Crowley's work continued?
Well, his writings on ritual magic, particularly his exploration of the 30 airs, have been very influential. He provided a framework for accessing these other realms of consciousness that many occultists continue to explore today.
And there's also the whole debate about his use of
the Enochian system.
The Enochian system.
Right.
That angelic language and symbolism that he adapted from.
From earlier
occultists. Crowley's interpretation and adaptation of the Enochian system brought it to a wider audience. And sparked a renewed interest in this complex and a fascinating branch of magic.
It's interesting how he combined these older systems, like the Enochian magic, with his own innovations.
His approach.
He was a master synthesizer,
magic,
pulling from various traditions and weaving them together in his own unique way.
He wasn't just copying what came before.
No, not at all.
He was actively building on those traditions and pushing them in new directions.
In new directions, absolutely.
So we've talked about his influence on magical practices. But what about his
philosophical ideas?
What aspects of his worldview continue to resonate with people today? Well, that theme of self-discovery and living in alignment with one's true will remains incredibly powerful. Even if we set aside the more controversial aspects of his life, that core message of self-actualization through exploring the depths of one's being continues to appeal to many who are seeking a path beyond conventional norms.
It's a reminder that even within a figure as complex and controversial as Crowley, we can find nuggets of wisdom. And insight if we're willing.
To look
beyond the surface. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
From his early days. In a rigid religious environment. To his embrace of a path that many considered scandalous and dangerous. Crowley's life was anything but ordinary.
He was anything but ordinary.
He pushed boundaries, challenged convention.
Absolutely.
And left an undeniable mark on the world of occultism.
For sure.
He was
a fascinating and contradictory figure.
Reminder
that the pursuit of knowledge and power, even spiritual power, is a double-edged sword. His story is a cautionary tale, but also an invitation to explore the depths of human potential and the mysteries that lie beyond the surface of everyday reality.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've all learned a great deal about Aleister Crowley. His magical world and his enduring legacy.
He's a complex
figure who continues to spark debate and fascination even today. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway.
Maybe so.
Crowley's life and work challenge us to think critically.
Absolutely.
To question our assumptions. And to continue exploring the mysteries of the human spirit.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Into the world of Aleister Crowley. We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.